Well, it is 12:30, so I think we are going to go ahead and get started. Um, I'm going to take you through just a few ground rules and things for our meeting today. You should see my screen. Panelists, give me a thumbs up. You guys still see my screen there? Yep. Okay, good. So first of all, just a reminder, if you would like to make a comment, we have our webinar chat for that. There's a button that you can press, that chat button. If you press it, you can make comments there. Everybody will see those comments. So the panelists who are our governing board primarily, and then we also have Sally Hagelin, our business manager, on for our budget presentation today. So our panelists will see those, but also everybody else that's participating in this congregation meeting webinar will see your comments there in the chat as well. But again, a reminder that that chat is for comments. So if you have something that you'd like to say that you'd like everybody to see, that's the place to put it in that chat. Now, if you want to ask a question, that's what the Q&A is for. And again, there's a Q&A button on the bottom of your screen that you can press, and those questions will come up. Now, we do have somebody who's monitoring those questions to make sure that we notice those questions and those questions get answered. As those questions are asked and then answered, they'll move from the open questions thing to the answered questions as well. In addition, some of our panelists have the ability to just type in an answer to your question, so it may not be answered out loud by me or one of the other presenters, but an answer could be typed in there as well. Any one of our panelists can grab one of those questions and type in an answer to it. So we'll do that as well. We are going to be voting today on two different things. We're going to be voting to approve the balance of our budget for fiscal year 21. You may remember back in June, we approved a temporary bridge budget for 3 months to buy us some time during the pandemic to get our numbers together. And we actually then at our open forum in August presented the budget for the balance of the year to you. And so we'll be voting to approve that. And then the second poll that we'll be using for voting is, of course, voting to approve our senior pastor transition plan and the calling of Nick Price as our senior pastor elect and eventually senior pastor. So that's going to be happening later as well. I want to let you know that all the panelists have been warned, and I would like to warn all of you as well that there are people who are taping the Bear game today, and they do not want to know what the score is. So please, no Bears comments in the chat, or no Bears questions in the Q&A, and panelists, don't talk about the Bears. Okay, we're going to do that for folks that are taping that game. I suspect some of you are actually watching the game while this webinar is going on. That's okay, you're welcome to do that, but so let's not spoil it for the others that aren't doing that. We are going to use this as our agenda today, and I'm going to go ahead and spotlight our congregation chair, Ken Rack, here, and let him call the meeting to order and go over the agenda. So, Ken?
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. And I am officially calling our meeting to order here for this special congregation meeting for the purposes that Mark identified. So, as you can see here, with our agenda for the meeting, Doug Dorgan is going to open us up with a devotion. Then Mark will talk about our fall series. We'll have the budget review and then go into a review of the transition plan. So with that, Doug?
Just before we throw it to Doug, Ken, just two more quick things to let people know. I should have done this before I hand it over to you, I think, but if you go to the website and go to tlc4u.org/meeting, there's two files there that you could have downloaded in advance of the meeting, or you could still download now during the meeting if you'd like. First of all, there is the FY21 budget file that has the detail. I'm going to be showing you that file actually on the screen, but if you'd like to print out a copy of it or look at a PDF of it in your computer, you can do that there as well. The other file there is the bio and resume for Pastor Nick. I know a lot of you know Pastor Nick very well because he's been our site pastor over at Trinity Kimberly Way for a while. But if you go to one of our other sites, you may not know Nick as well. And so his bio and resume are there for you as well if you'd like to look at them or download that as well. So with that in mind, now I'm going to go ahead and put Doug Dorgan on. Doug.
Hey, thanks, Mark. Good afternoon, everybody at Trinity. Welcome to this special congregation meeting. Very much appreciate you taking the time out of your Sunday afternoons and pulling yourself away from the Bears game to attend to very important business. One of the things that I was considering as we were preparing for today is that there is scripture that can help us process the business of the church and the way in which we go about decision making. One of the things that I find is that we often approach planning and decision making in a kind of a clinical and business-like manner. It's really kind of what we know, facts, figures, goals, objectives, all of those become very important considerations. And the fact that it works for us in our everyday life, it's natural that that's the way we would apply ourselves in our church work. But it is interesting because when you think about it, we should be reminded that when we do work in all things, but in particular in church work, that the Lord is ultimately present and guiding our actions. And I think that can really be captured very well by Proverbs 3 verses 5 and 6, which reads, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths." So these are two pretty simple scripture that on face value seem relatively straightforward. But when you begin to tease out some of the individual messages in each passage of these two verses of scripture, it takes on a little bit of a different meaning. So I'd like to just take a few minutes to dive into that. So the beginning of the passage starts, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart." So what is God saying here? In my mind, he's kind of encouraging us to walk away from any doubt, any uncertainty, any anxiety. Ultimately, he's looking for us to place our trust exclusively in him. And I think what's kind of important here, it's oftentimes we approach these things very intellectually, but he's really kind of speaking to us on more of an emotional level. You know, he's asking that your heart be given to him on all matters that we consider. And the next phrase, it says, "And lean not on your own understanding." So there's a popular catchphrase that's out there that people often use about leaning into something. And when I first started hearing that term, I always kind of wondered, what the heck are they talking about? And when you hear somebody asking you to lean in, they're really asking you to kind of, double down, really engage in the topic and push past what might otherwise be holding you back. So in this context, we're being asked to lean into him. Yes, actually doubling down, praying, really engaging and discerning his guidance, free from the influence of our own thoughts and feelings. Then the next verse, "In all your ways acknowledge him. In everything we know that he is at work, that his will be done, giving thanks and praise that he is there for us." And then finally, it ends by him saying, "And he will direct your paths." I think what he's ultimately, when you just begin piecing these together, what he's kind of saying here is, if we have fully trusted in him, if we have prayed for his guidance to be revealed in our actions and in our decisions, and have acknowledged that he is always at work in all things that we do, at the end, he promises that he will lead us where he needs us and wants us to be. So I'd just like everybody to think about that a little bit, that at the end of the day, his will will be done in our work and actions today. So if I can, I'd just like to begin our time together in a quick prayer, and then I'll turn it back over to Ken and Mark. So dear Heavenly Father, we just so thank you for the blessing of today, for the blessing of your people, that they are here with one mission: to look, live, and love more like you, to bring those that don't know you to you. Today, Lord, you've asked us to tackle some weighty issues. We have short-term needs and plans for the church, but we're also looking at your longer-term plans for us and decisions about the path forward and the way in which we're going to continue serving you and your kingdom. And Lord, just open our hearts, open our minds to all that we will hear and learn today, and that at the end of the day, that the outcomes would be pleasing in your sight, and that it will be your will that be done. These things we ask in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Okay, thanks, Doug. So it's my job to take a little time to walk us through again, first of all, our worship plan for this fall, which includes what our fall series is going to be. And then to talk a little bit about how we are going to worship indoors as a part of that. And then finally to present our budget today. So first of all, these were our last outdoor services this weekend at our 4 sites. Starting next weekend, October 4th, barring any crazy weird changes over the next week, we are going to begin our indoor worship. Now, I say that, but one caveat on that. I know our Galewood location, because of kind of the uniqueness of their setting, is looking to maybe stay outdoors for a few extra weeks. They have the option of moving indoors if the weather's bad, but if Trinity Galewood is your normal place to attend, you guys may still be outdoors next week. Just keep an eye on that. One of the things we are asking at all 4 of our sites is that people register in advance. Now, they've already been doing that at Galewood. We're asking our other 3 sites to be doing that as well. And we're doing that for 2 reasons. First of all, we do have building capacity issues. We are following the Illinois Department of Public Health guidelines for worshiping indoors. Worship is considered an essential task, and so it is not limited to the 50 and under limitation that we find for other things. Kind of, by the way, interestingly enough, if we were to do a funeral or a wedding, we do have to follow that 50 or under rule at our sites, because those are not considered essential. But Sunday morning worship, our governor has identified as an essential activity, therefore not subject to the 50 or under guideline, and instead to some capacity guidelines. So we are following those Illinois Department of Public Health guidelines. We do that, by the way, for 2 reasons. First of all, we think it's wise to do and safe to do. And second of all, there are some liability issues for us if we don't follow those guidelines. So we are doing that. So each one of our locations has a different indoor capacity. That's why we're asking you to register in advance, so that we know for any particular service, we will be under that capacity limit. There's also a "we care about you" reason for that. If by some chance, God willing, we pray this doesn't happen, but if by some chance we were to find out after a Sunday worship service that someone who attended had later tested positive for COVID, we want to be able to alert everybody that was in that service. Now, we're not going to tell you who that was. That would be a violation of their personal rights. But we will let you know that, on such and such Sunday in this service, someone tested positive, and that would give you a chance to make some decisions about whether you wanted to get tested yourself or things like that. So we are asking you to register in advance. Masks are going to be required for the whole service. For outdoors, we've been allowing people to go ahead and remove their masks once they get seated. Remember, outdoors is significantly safer regarding aerosol spreads of the virus than indoor. We are doing all we can to improve air quality at every one of our locations to make indoor as safe as possible, but it is still riskier than being outdoors. So we're asking that masks stay on during the whole service. We will be socially distancing people. Again, that will depend on your location. There are different ways to do that. I know I was at Kimberly Way this morning and walked into the worship center, and we already have every other pew marked off as you can't use those pews. So we've got that. But we will be social distancing. We are asking people not to sing. Singing in itself isn't a problem, the studies tell us, but volume is a problem. So speaking loudly or singing loudly, which is what we tend to do when we sing, at least I do, and a lot of you do, and we're glad you sing loudly, but that is a little riskier activity. So we're asking you to keep your masks on. If you want to sing quietly behind the mask, no one's going to stop you, but we are discouraging singing, especially loud singing, because of the potential danger there. So those are going to be our rules for indoor worship. If you would like to know more about when your site is worshiping, or if you would like to know more about those rules, if you go to tlcforyou.org/worship, there's a chance for you to find out more there. Go to our website or look at your site's particular website. Again, if you go to tlcforyou.org, the 4 sites are listed across the top. Pick your site. There's going to be information there. And by the way, if you go to the Trinity COVID page, we do have all of our rules, everything we're doing to the buildings before worship, during worship, and after worship. So you can see the full set of indoor rules that we're following as we worship together. Most importantly of all, If you do not feel comfortable coming to worship, online worship is here to stay. We're going to continue to put a lot of resources into making that online worship experience the best experience it can be for you. And so you will be able to continue to worship. People have asked me, is online worship real worship? Absolutely. Jesus said, where 2 or 3 are gathered, there am I among you. And by the way, he didn't say gathering couldn't be done virtually. So even though the disciples may not have envisioned that, Jesus was God. He knew someday we'd be worshiping together during that form. So online worship is here to stay. Again, if you go to, that's from our COVID page, you can download the complete for indoor worship guidelines by clicking on that link that you see on that screen there. Now, when we start worshiping next weekend, we're going to be doing this series called Speaking of Jesus. We're going to be talking about spiritual conversations. And in fact, our goal for this series is to increase the number and the quality of spiritual conversations we are all having. That could be something as simple as talking about the sermon with your spouse or with a son or daughter. It could be something as deep and profound as letting a coworker know the difference that Jesus has made in your life. But we know those conversations are important because, again, in Romans it tells us this. It says, before people can ask for the Lord for help, they need to believe in him. And before they need to believe in him, they have to hear about him. And before they can hear about him, someone has to talk to him. Somebody has to tell him. God has linked people coming to know about his love and his grace to the conversations we have with them. And so those conversations are important. We're going to have weekend messages every week through October and November for the series. There's a group study, a 6-week group study, and we encourage you to get in a small group. Again, tlc4u.org/groups, and you can get connected if you're not in a small group. And then we are recommending you pick up a book called 42 Seconds by Carl Medeiros. It has daily devotions about this whole idea of spiritual conversations. The idea behind the title of the book is they analyzed all of the conversations that Jesus had with people, and they average about 42 seconds long in the Bible. Now, they were probably longer than that in real life, but there are count of them in the Bible. They average about 42 seconds, and so these daily devotions are going to help you think through the impact just short conversations about Jesus can have with people. And those are daily devotions that will go along with the series. So I encourage you to get a copy of that book. And that all starts next weekend. So we're really thrilled and excited about that. Can't wait to roll up our sleeves and talk about Jesus this fall. Now we'll go ahead and I'm going to just take a look at some questions here to see if there are any questions that we need to answer about what we just talked about. The question is, how do you register the TLC website? And again, yes, the answer to that is if you go to the tlc4u.org website and your particular site, you will be able to register right there. Another question asks, why masks are required during the entire service when restaurants allow you to take your mask off when you sit? We're going to follow the Illinois Department of Public Health guidelines. The Illinois Department of Public Health guidelines recommend that masks be on during the entire service. Here's what we know. There are a lot of things we still don't know, and I think a year from now we'll even know a lot more. But here's what we know. We know wearing a mask, paying attention to air quality, paying attention to the distance you are from people, and paying attention to the duration you are with people. All those are important factors. So we're going to cut down on the duration a little bit. Services are going to be about 45 minutes long. We're doing our best with air quality, but we recognize indoor air quality just isn't as good as outdoor air quality, no matter how hard we try to make it so. We're going to help you try to stay distant, but keeping a mask on is just that much better for helping do all we can to prevent spread of the virus from our worship services. So that's the guideline. We're going to follow that guideline. I get the fact that the guidelines don't always seem to make sense with one another. Yeah, you can, if you're sitting in a restaurant, you can take your mask off. But when you do that, you are adding some risk. So that's why we are going to encourage people to keep wearing their mask. And so another question, will there be communion during the indoor services? Yes, we are going to celebrate communion much the same way we've been doing it outdoors. So when you come for worship, you will be given what you're going to need to celebrate the Lord's Supper. We are not going to come up in a line or kneel at the altar because again, that can bring people in closer proximity and cause some risk. We will commune as you're seated in the pews with the elements that you've been given at the beginning of the service when you arrive. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and turn my attention to the budget now. And again, this is not substantially different in any way than what you saw if you were at our open forum. In fact, we received very positive feedback from the budget we presented at the open forum last month. I do want to take a few minutes to talk about some key assumptions and decisions that are in this budget. I'm not going to work through each one of these because again, we did that at the open forum last month, but just a couple to highlight for you. First of all, remember that this was a particularly difficult budget year for a couple of reasons. And one of those reasons is we assumed going in that while in the past couple of years, all of our expenses at at Galewood and South Naperville were covered by those startup dollars coming through our Immeasurably More campaign. We knew that this year, only about half of those expenses were going to be covered through Immeasurably More because we were hitting that $1.5 million threshold that we had pledged through the Immeasurably More campaign to assist with the startup costs of those sites. So that means there are some significant expenses for both of those sites that are now in our regular budget this year. So we knew that that would make the budget tighter this year. We knew that was coming, but that time is here. And so that's in that assumption. Also want to point out to you that because of our present pandemic environment, we are not projecting any kind of growth in giving over the next year. So far, giving is on budget for this year, and we praise God for that. Our online giving is up over 70% now. We praise God for that. We're actually slightly ahead right now of where we would have budgeted we would be. We're a little behind where giving was last year because last year we had a huge July and that we didn't have that same big July this year. But so we have projected a flat revenue from giving over this next year, and we are praying that folks are able to keep giving, recognizing that that may change over the year, and we're going to be monitoring that. Also, remember we did have these funds from the PPP loan, and those funds are coming in as income in this budget now, as what was a loan now gets forgiven and becomes actual non-liability in our budget. We had told you that we were going to budget in 95% of those loans being forgiven. We could pay that other 5% back if it isn't forgiven. But I can tell you in conversation with our business manager, with Sally this week, she anticipates that the full 100% of that is going to be forgiven. We just don't have that change in there. That's about a $25,000 difference. I see Sally nodding at me behind her camera, so I think I got that number right. And if you have a further question on that during the Q&A time here, I'm sure Sally can answer that for you. But we are anticipating that the full 100% of those dollars will be forgiven. Now, I explained this at the open forum last month. I want to explain it again. This budget is really a balancing act, because in one hand, you're going to see a big surplus in this budget. And that surplus is there primarily because of those PPP loan dollars that are coming in. And so on one hand, you could say, well, there's a big surplus. We've made some pretty hard decisions in this budget. There are some positions that are being eliminated. I'm going to talk with you about those in a little bit. You can say, well, why would we eliminate positions and put people out of work when we have this big surplus? Again, we have to balance using those dollars that we have and kind of buying time as we get through this pandemic with the idea that the reality is we've got to prepare for the future here and deal with the new realities that this pandemic have brought on. So we can't just blindly spend all the money and just hope things will be better next year or trust that things are going to be different next year, because we know that, for example, we won't have any immeasurably more dollars to use for Green Trail or for Galewood and South Naperville next year. So we have to prepare for those new realities, at the same time balancing that with using some of those funds that we have. So that's what we've tried to do with this budget. So here are the actual numbers. And again, if you've downloaded the file, you're seeing the actual budget detail there. A few things I want to highlight for you on there. First of all, you see that roughly $2.75 million giving that we're anticipating for the next year. If you look along that line to fiscal year 20 actual, we ended the year last year at 2.749. So, basically we're proposing a flat budget from a giving perspective. There's that financial campaign revenue that's coming in to still offset some of the costs from Galewood and South Naperville, and recognizing that that number was much larger in the past, but we've reached, again, as I said, the end of that 1.5 million dedicated to those startup costs from our Immeasurably More dollars. There's that PPP loan, and again, that's assuming still at 95% forgiveness. Again, we believe that will actually be about $507 or $9, somewhere in that range, $507,000, and we believe that is all going to be forgiven. We are returning to 5 mission partners. We're excited that Mission India is one of our new mission partners this year. Last year we had 4 mission partners, so that those numbers are reflected there. And we're excited about our new mission partner, in addition to Voice of Care here in the United States, our mission partner in Estonia, our mission partner in Norway, and our mission partner in Bolivia. By the way, just a real quick note, we were planning for Advent this year to be doing something with World Vision in conjunction in Bolivia. That is not going to be able to happen because Bolivia is still shut down because of the coronavirus. But we are looking at doing that in Lent next year instead, and hoping that Bolivia will be open and we can be working through World Vision to continue to impact the children of Bolivia like we presently do with Niños con Valor, our mission partner there in Bolivia. You'll see that the compensation number is actually down some from last year. And again, as I mentioned, there are some positions that are not in this budget. I do want to let you know about those. First of all, Linda Bailey, who's been on our staff for 25 years, by the way, has been working part-time with our Play Center families. Well, since the Play Center is shut down and is going to be for the foreseeable future, that position in this budget is being eliminated, which means Linda's call is ending because of a reduction in force. We are, by the way, going to do something special for Linda and thank her for her many years of service here at Trinity. Gary Ireland's been involved in our college ministry, and he has some donors that privately help him support that ministry that he does at North Central College. We've been paying the difference. We've been kind of subsidizing that salary and paying the difference. We're not going to be able to do that anymore, and we've let Gary know that, and he's aware of that. Chad Leonard has been our director of care ministry part-time. Chad is actually a chaplain with a hospice program here in the area, but he's been spending part of his time part-time helping us with our care ministry. This is a decision that is probably less COVID related and more strategy related, but both are involved. And that is, we believe now is the right time to shift the care portion of our ministry instead of kind of overall all of Trinity to the individual sites. So our care for members is still going to keep on happening at the same level it has, but that will be more site directed than overall directed. And so Chad's position in that catalytic role will not be there anymore. We've got a bunch of our Grounds for Hope front house staff that, baristas and things that are no longer employed, again, because of our cutback in hours at Grounds for Hope. And we've seen staff reductions at our early childhood center as well because of their reduced enrollment. And so just want to make you aware of the fact that we do have folks that have been affected from our family because of what's going on in the world around us. So net, that means we're looking at about a $277,000 surplus in this budget. Now, some of that does get eaten up by the fact that we are anticipating, both through Grounds for Hope and the TKW preschool and the tech, that we are going to see some losses still this year as the coronavirus continues to affect those parts of our ministry. And so we are projecting at this point about $140,000 surplus. And again, just a reminder, part of the reason that we need that surplus, we can't just, is because, first of all, we're not sure exactly how this year is going to go. Second of all, we need to plan for the future as well. And so we believe that this is a reasonable balance between getting us through this year and also planning for the future. So looking for questions on this budget right now, and I see we have a few coming in. First of all, I'll take one related back to worship. Can non-alcoholic communion be provided in the live services? Yes, it can. And in fact, it should have already been provided for you. The little communion cups that we are using, we have both wine, and there are non-alcoholic versions of those available. Now I see my wife shaking her head no at me, so maybe we haven't ordered any of those to this point, but we will certainly look into that. Those are available, I know. So the question is whether we're going to get some in, and we will see what we can do about that. That's certainly something we'd like to accommodate for you if we can. Next question is, are all the staff reductions permanent, or will these folks potentially be called back when circumstances change? Honestly, we just don't know. I would love to see us, like, for example, if that play center is open again and there's a need for additional ministry help to work with that, bringing Linda back would be a very real possibility. But we just don't know what the future is going to hold. I can tell you, in the case of, for example, in Chad's position, as I said, that move to move the care function to the sites rather than in an overall catalytic function, that decision probably isn't going to change. But we will certainly, and certainly when it comes to like Grounds for Hope with baristas, as we pray next spring or whenever that happens, there's a vaccine and people are going out a lot more and the cafe business picks up, certainly we would be bringing some of those folks back. On the PPP loan forgiveness, with the elimination and reduction of some roles, how do we still qualify for loan forgiveness? We've used up those funds. So the question there is saying, I thought those funds were there to help keep people employed. They have, but quite frankly, we've used those funds for that already. So we've basically kept people employed in some cases since March, when they were no longer working. So for March, April, May, June, July, August, September, we have been keeping people employed using those dollars. But that period has come to an end now. And so that's why we've had to make some decisions at this point about how do we continue to move forward. So we have used those funds for that purpose. That's why they will be forgiven. But those funds are limited and they were never anticipated that they would keep people employed forever. And so we've kind of reached the end of that. So the question is, if Chad is leaving, who will be taking his place at the individual sites? I really like him. I like Chad a lot too. Chad and I had a great conversation earlier this week as we talked about this change. Chad is still a very active part of our Trinity family. He let me know that his intention is to keep volunteering in ways he can. He's been a chaplain 4 days a week through his hospice, and he's hoping, they've been asking him for a while to expand that to 5 days a week. So he's hoping that is going to happen now, but intends to still be involved as a part of our family. He has led the service of remembrance at Christmas time, and we're questioning exactly what we're going to do with that and how that will move forward. But at each site, basically, it will be the site pastor who will be the key champion for care at that site, with other volunteers and people involved. And I know, by the way, Chad's plan is to stay involved at Slum Mobile with that at our Kimberly Way location, because that's his normal location. So I see a question that came up in the web. I was just checking the chat to see if there were any questions in there that didn't get in the Q&A, and I see one there about the preschool. So right now, as you know, our early childhood center at South Naperville is already open. And so that is happening there. But at our Kimberly Way location right now, the plan is we have a new director for the preschool. And the plan is to open up that preschool starting at some point after the first of the year. As we were talking with parents who were already enrolled, there was a lot of discomfort about what we were going to do the fall. And the parents actually started saying to us, well, what about January? Would you guys consider, opening indoors in January? And so we've kind of queued off that. And so right now, God willing, the plan is to open with indoor instruction for the preschool at Kimberly Way, with that kind of restart of the preschool starting in January. Chad said, thanks, Mark. And you are welcome, Chad. And you are such a blessing. And we know you will continue to be. Question from Darlene, no longer Honduras. I assume that means in response to our mission partners. Honduras has not been an official mission partner of Trinity for many, many years. We still do send mission teams to Honduras to work with World Gospel Outreach there, primarily medical teams in Tegucigalpa. And as soon as we were able, we had a trip planned for the summer, but obviously that didn't happen with COVID. And so we're hoping that next year we can send another mission team with World Gospel Outreach. It's just that they are not one of our 5 mission partners that are funded directly through the budget. So we still do work with folks in Honduras as well. All right. Not seeing any other questions. Ken, if it's all right with you, I'm going to go ahead and get ready to launch that poll.
Yes.
So I'm going to go ahead and put you on here for a second, Ken, if you want to go ahead and call for this vote, and I will launch the poll.
Okay. You should see a poll in where you do get to vote online. And so what we are voting on is, be it resolved that the congregation approve the ministry plan and budget for fiscal year 21 with unrestricted revenue of $3,489,771 and expenses of $3,212,638. So at this time, please go ahead and register your votes.
While you're doing that, I did receive a question that that came to me. Sorry, saw another text as well. The question that came to me was what couldn't figure out how to put this into the chat, but the question was, how risky would you say this budget is? Every budget has risk to it. I've been using with our congregation that out on a limb kind of image. Does this put us way out on the limb, or are we kind of hugging the trunk? And I would say we're not quite hugging the trunk, but certainly we're not way out on the limb. We do think this budget is a good balance between risk and in trusting in God. One of the reasons I would say it isn't a huge risk is because our cash position as a congregation is actually pretty good right now. One of the things we've been able to do even this last month is pay back some of that line of credit that we had taken out in last year. So our cash position is healthy. Giving has been good. Is there risk with every budget? Yes. I would say we're not hugging the tree. We're not way out on the really weak part of the limb. We're kind of in the middle there, which is, again, what we were trying to do with this budget. Another question that came up while the poll continues to run here just a little bit was speak to the lease agreement at Green Trails. Remember when we first moved into Green Trails a little over 10 years ago, we had a 10-year lease with with 2 5-year options. So that would put it at a 20-year. Those are at our option, not the landlord's option. We are in the first of those 5 extensions that we did extend with the landlord. So we are locked in for at least another 5 years. We have the ability to lock it in for another 5. That said, I can tell you that I've been in conversation with our landlord. God does some cool things, and turns out over the last few years, I've become really good friends with someone that has been best friends with our landlord for 30 years. And so God has kind of brought that relationship together in kind of a neat way. And I've had some conversations with Phil Maroney, our landlord. He is open to the idea of a even more long-term lease if we're interested in thinking that through a little. Obviously, with the whole COVID thing, that's been put on hold a little bit from both ends. But as things start to recover and as things start to change, we're going to continue those conversations and do what's best for Trinity. And of course, obviously, before we would do anything else, that would go not only through our governing board, but ultimately you, the congregation, would have to make any decision on any changes to our existing lease there. Okay, I think the poll is done. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, and I can share the results with you. As you can see, 97% of our 170 people voted to approve. Actually, that number is a little higher because I have about another 10 votes between our panelists whose votes don't show up in there and the votes from Trinity Green Trails. And so the budget has passed for another year, and we thank you for that. We thank you for your attention to that as well. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And Ken, I think you might actually still be pinned, but let me, yeah, you're still spotlighted. So Ken, you're still on there. Okay. And when you are ready, please go ahead and take over for our next topic.
All right, come on, computer.
Ken, maybe while you're doing that real quickly, there was one other question that I want to clarify. I said that non-alcoholic wine kits are available. What I've been informed of is that's kind of true, but not exactly. Here's the hesitation. Again, Kevin, this will buy you a second to figure out what's going on there. At Trinity, we use wine. We use some of the wine we use is with the alcohol removed. We've always felt that just using grape juice that was never wine is probably okay, but Jesus used wine. And so we've tried to always use wine, even if it's de-alcoholed wine. That is not available in those little kits, the de-alcoholed wine. The only thing that is available is grape juice. And so we'd probably have to go back and have a further conversation as a pastoral staff on that before we would start using those. So that gives you, we do have gluten-free, however, available. So just wanted to let you know that. So, okay, Ken, it looks like you're ready to go.
Okay. And this is just verifying that if there's no operator error on my part. We're seeing everyone hopefully is seeing the slide. Yes. Okay.
Yep. Yes.
So once again, let me echo the thank you to everybody for taking the time. We do have some other important things in which we need to continue our discussion on here through this meeting. And so I'm going to be presenting the information. We do have the other members of the governing board as panelists here. So if you have hard questions, go ahead and pick one of them to answer instead of me, and I'll take all the softball easy questions. But yes, also as a reminder, we as members of your governing board, we are elected from the congregation. So we are your representatives to all the different business and activities and things that we're talking about. So same as what Mark did for my portion of the presentation here, I'm presenting. The rest of the governing board is there. I'm going to be reviewing, kind of refreshing some of the things that we talked about during our August meeting, and we'll cover all of those, and it's going to be at a little bit quicker pace than what was covered during our last one. And I'm sure I've gotten feedback from some of my friends that I think would appreciate that. So we'll try and keep that at a quicker pace. But what we're going to be doing is we've already reviewed the budget and approved that. This segment of the meeting is to review the transition plan and then the call for Nick Price to be our next senior pastor. All right, so just for some general background again, and I'm not going to read all of these different points, but we as the governing board started on this and looking at this at the beginning of the year. And there was a lot of work because we did get some questions that I'm going to try and roll in and my discussion here some of the questions that we did receive from all of you. So for those people who did put in questions, thank you very much. But there was a lot of work that was done, and you can see here by the timeline with the activities that have been going on for some period of time to get us to where we are today. There was a 3-person subcommittee, and that was made up of Sandy Jett, Doug Dorgan, and myself that put together the conceptual design for this. But we did talk to a lot of people, not only members of the board and everyone that's on our leadership team and our senior staff, but we talked to a number of other congregations to get their inputs and their insights of what's a good way to do it, and to make sure we were implementing some of the best practices that other churches have done. And I would have to say that each step along the way, every time that we talked with different people, we learned something new that we didn't know before. And we did roll all of those things into our plan because, you know, when you look at 2023, initially that looks like, well, gee, that's a long time away. Well, it is, but as we're going to be talking about, there's a number of things on why and understanding and planning for all of that time. We're going to absorb that time pretty quickly here as we wind up going forward. We did wind up also getting input from the Northern Illinois District President, who also reviewed and approves also of the direction and things and the places that we're going with this. I do want to touch on one other piece of it for this slide. We as Trinity have the most sites or locations of any church in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. So not just Northern Illinois District, but across the entire LCMS. So it's quite often a standard type of practice that the governing board does act in the role of the call committee for those kinds of, or these kinds of things in going forward. So once again, that was identified as good practice, and that's one of the reasons why we adopted it here for our plan as well. Also, to just kind of quickly review, these are things here that took place. You know, we wind up having monthly meetings with the governing board. And this topic was something that has been on the agenda for all of those months. But then when we got to the May and June timeframe, there was a lot of additional work and things that we knew that we had to do. So we had a number of special meetings with the governing board to talk about this, where we got, once again, a lot of good input. We made some changes to the timeline and plan, and all of that got rolled up to it. So we as a board took a vote in July to bring the recommendations to you as the congregation, which is what we did on August 23rd, for both to approve the transition plan and to call Pastor Nick as our next senior pastor. So one of the things that we did get from input from people were, especially for those that aren't at Trinity Kimberly Way, is they may not know Nick, or they may not know him well enough. So I'm going to put up these bullets here, and Mark shared before the link, but there is the link on the website where you can actually get a copy of the bio that Nick had put up there for us. And you can see the facts that are here. You know, Nick and Jenny have been involved, and their family have been involved heavily at Trinity since 2008 in a number of different areas and capacities. So this kind of talks about what he's done and where he's been, his qualifications. But if you haven't had a chance to review the bio, I did. I've got a copy here, and there's just a couple things that I wanted to share with you, because I think it kind of talks through or shares a bit of who Nick is as a man. So as we know that, you know, Nick did not start out as being a Christian. He was a skeptic. And, you know, for those of us that have heard him talk about it, you know, we also know Nick's a very smart man. So we had a very smart skeptic. But fortunately, he had a number of Christian friends, and someone gave him a Bible, Nick wound up then reviewing the Bible. And I think that's a good thing for all of us to remember, is that all of us can have that same kind of impact on someone that can then have an impact on all of us. And that's what happened in Nick's case. So just a couple of things here to quickly share. You know, from here, Nick writes down, you know, what struck me about the Bible is that it was, well, a very human book. It was filled with normal people who made mistakes and were flawed, just like me. Unlike the stories from other religions, there weren't heroes with idols to be worshiped. This was a story of a bunch of screw-ups and a God who loved them anyway. And then, he talks about how the light bulb went off for him, and he realized that Jesus was God and how God's been working through all the times in the Old Testament to get to where we are today. And then there's one other statement that he makes here that I think is common not only for Nick, but all of our pastors and many other people across our congregation. But what he writes here is, my deepest desire is to see more people come to know Jesus in the way that I know him, and to be a part of the kingdom work that he is doing. So I just wanted to share that because I think that goes and shows a little bit of the heart of Nick and what he feels and what he thinks and his love for our congregation. We did as we went through this process, one of the things that we heard was, when you're considering an internal candidate, or should you consider an internal candidate, the answer was, unless you feel the direction that your church is going is broken, or you need to reset and start to do some things differently, it's better for someone, if you have people that can fill that role internally, and we do with Nick, that they understand the culture. And Nick has demonstrated his leadership in a number of different ways, and once again is why we're recommending Nick as being our next senior pastor. All right, I'm going to quickly step through the timeline, and you can see the dates across to, starting out to where we are now and then going through 2023. This is our current organizational structure. Within this structure, you can see the number of people here. And one of the things that we recognized as part of this is, initially we thought 2023, okay, we'll come up with, identifying a successor for Mark, probably come up with some time where they can work together, and then we'll go from there. But then as we started to dig into this more, we recognized there were some other things we could do to help with the structure and the organization of our team, and that's also built into this transition plan. And as you can see here, Mark talked a little bit about the Catalyst team, but we've got our 4 sites. Amanda is our director of family and children's ministry. We've got our Catalyst team, and as a reminder, the Catalyst team is a number of talented people excuse me, that we just try and leverage and get some economies of scale across all of our sites. And that's who makes that up. And we have Sally as our business manager. So as we go into, once again, I'm going to go through these things quickly because we've talked about them before. But then starting in January of 2021, we have Nick identified as, this is with the assumption that all of you approve this, we have Nick in the role as our senior pastor-elect, Mark still in the role of senior pastor, and this was a purposeful with the idea that gives some time for Nick to be able to get, mentor, learn, get some coaching from Mark as they're going forward. And then we're going to start recruiting for the part-time site pastor. We did get some questions as far as for what does that mean and how is that going to happen and how's Nick going to do this. Is the senior pastor-elect, for the first 6 months out of the year, or he'll be the senior pastor-elect for the year, but for the first 6 months out of the year, there aren't going to be that many more additional duties. So Nick will still continue to be the site pastor over at Trinity Kimberly Way. And then we are going to start the recruiting process for whoever will be that site pastor. And then also for our executive director position, that and I'll touch on that in a moment. We may be looking to see if there are, as we start our search for whoever that person will be at Trinity Kimberly Way, we may, in the interim, continue to get some help from Pastor Tom Knoll, who I know many of you know, who is retired, but then still does come back to help. We may get some help like that from someone like Tom, but then, or we may be able to find someone that can go into that role that will then transition into that role as on a permanent basis. Nick has already instructed the Northern Illinois District President that at this time he's not going to consider any other calls, so we have Nick in that role. The other thing that we want to make sure and point out is, why we're identifying things this early is because our current 5-year strategic plan, it expires or it ends in July of 2022. So we wanted to have some time to formulate and build this next strategic plan, but to also make sure and clarify, because we did get some questions on this, the next strategic plan, be it a 3-year plan or a 5-year plan, is going to be developed by a lot of different people. There'll be all of us as far as for the governing board. There'll be members of the congregation that will be soliciting input from. There'll be the rest of our leadership team that you see here that will be providing some input along the way. And then all of those things will be rolled up, and then it will be approved as far as by all of us that, what our plan will be going forward through the governing board. But whoever is in that role, and assuming with the assumption here it's Nick, they're going to be the ones responsible for championing that whole strategic plan and implementing it with the help of all of us. All right, now moving on into 2022. So Nick now assumes the role as the senior pastor for Trinity. And one of the things that we got from input from talking with a number of different congregations that is a good practice is that once the experienced senior pastor is not in that role any longer, it's a good time for them to take some time off. So Mark has earned some sabbatical time from previously that he did not take completely. And he has some more sabbatical time. So for the first 3 to 6 months out of 2022, Mark's going to be out of there. He will be coming back, and we've got some things, and hopefully that he's going to be involved in once he does return from his sabbatical. But Nick will be in that role. We will also, at that point in time, as you can see here, we've now have our executive director in place. And we now have taken the Catalyst team and put that reporting to that person. We did that primarily because before in the old structure, Mark had about 16 direct reports. And that's just not effective as far as for a multi-site congregation. That's not an effective way to organizationally be structured. So we took advantage of this time in order to change around that organizational structure. Now we're hoping, and Sally Hegland is being considered for that role, but by our constitution and bylaws, it is up to the senior pastor to be able to select who's going to be in that role. So at that time, the decision will be made who is going to be in that role of the executive director. Sally is in consideration for it based on all the skills and gifts and things that she wants to bring into her current role as the business manager. All right, now we're in 2023. So in 2023, Nick is now in that role, and you see that Mark's name is no longer on the organizational chart. Mark will be retired in July of 2023. But as Mark has reminded me at different times, in the Bible, it doesn't say you get to, when you retire, it doesn't say you're done. And there's still going to be things for people to do. So if God's got you around and you're breathing, there's a purpose for your life, and God's got something planned for that. So Mark is going to be volunteering in different part-time roles in different areas, both I think with our local congregation and probably the church at large. So we also took a look at, with this transition plan, we knew we needed to figure out not only when and things, but how to roll things out, how it should be structured. But we also took a look at what the actual cost would be. So we looked at it and did, over this entire transition timeline that's here, we calculate that cost to be about $75,000 is what we're estimating for the cost for this transition plan. Now, as Mark just presented, our annual budget, and that 75,000, that's for all 3.5 years here. With this annual budget that we have of more than $3 million, we're confident and we believe that God's going to provide for that additional cost, and that's really going to come with and through all of you as members of the congregation. So with that, that's done with the general review. So now I'd like to open up if there's any particular questions at this time. for me or anybody else from the board.
And I'm going to jump in for just a minute here. There were a couple of questions that came up, and I answered by typing them in while you were talking. First of all, just wanted to highlight for everybody something I put in the chat. Everybody involved thought it was wise that Pastor Nick not be a part of this webinar today. So that if you have any specific questions or concerns or things that you'd like to discuss, you don't have to worry about him seeing those things or being concerned about anything you would say. And so Nick is not on this call right now. There were a couple of questions about the Catalyst team, and I answered them in writing, so you can see my written answers there if you take a look at the answered questions. But just very quickly, the Catalyst team is the central team that isn't assigned to any one of the 4 site teams, but works to provide resources for all 4 of the sites. So just by definition, the senior pastor is part of that Catalyst team because the senior pastor isn't a part of any one of the site teams. Our business manager is part of that team. And again, the primary job of the Catalyst team is to provide resources and leadership for things happening at all 4 of our sites. For example, Michelle Bratton is a social worker. She's on our staff team. By the way, she's doing that as a volunteer, and we're very thankful to Michelle for serving in that role. But as a social worker, she provides all 4 of our sites with resources and connection to community resources for people that may have social needs. So let's say our site pastor runs into a need for someone at their site and they're not quite sure how to handle it. Michelle gets involved to help provide those resources, and she would do that for all 4 of our sites. So that gives you a sense of what that Catalyst team is. There was also another question asked about if all of our pastors would have been eligible to be called as senior pastor, and the answer to that is no. Our synod has 2 different ways of preparing pastors, through seminary education or through something called the Specific Ministry Pastor Program. And a number of our pastors have gone through that Specific Ministry Pastor Program, which allows them to get their seminary education while they are working in place. So Pastor Tony and Pastor Mike both went through that program. And even though we know that they are just as fantastic and legitimate a pastor as everybody else, our synod does put a different certification on them and does not consider them, because of that Specific Ministry Pastor certification, eligible for a senior pastor call. There was one other budget question, by the way, that got answered in the Q&A, but I thought maybe it would be worth saying out loud. The dollar amount for our 4 mission partners and 5 mission partners looked the same. Last year, we doubled the amount of funds available for specific mission projects since we were only at 4 mission partners. So we didn't take funds away from missions, even though we were only at 4 mission partners. We just used those for specific mission projects that came out, not our mission partners, and we've just shuttled those dollars back over. So hopefully that answered that question, and sorry to do a little shift there. Looking at some other questions, and Ken, I'm going to go ahead and put you back up here.
Okay.
And so one of the questions, Ken, is will there continue to be a business manager separate from the executive director position?
So when we do have the executive director position in place, and in my rushing through things, I failed to make the announcement as far as with Nick and why he wasn't on here. So thanks for that, Mark. But our intention is that the executive director role will assume the responsibilities of the business manager. So that business manager and the current responsibilities that Sally is fulfilling will now become part of the work of what the executive director is going to be responsible to do.
Thanks, Ken. Another question is, can you share how God has made evident his will in this time of transition? Have we heard his voice in this time? And Ken, you may have something to say about that. I wonder, maybe one of our other governing board members wants to weigh in on that too. So why don't you go ahead and go, and I'll kind of watch and see if any of the other board members want to chime in. So
yeah, the short answer to the question is definitely yes. You know, we started this out, and you know, when Mark told us, we knew that it was some things that we need to do, but the gravity of coming up with the recommendations, or even trying to find someone to be able to replace Mark, that I think for all of us on the governing board, we felt that responsibility right away. I know me personally, it was something, and many of the rest of us on the board, there was a lot of prayers that were happening on, please give us guidance, please let us know what your will is, God, please, just help us go through this, because we recognize this is something that's going to affect Trinity for many years to come. So yes, we did. I think God has answered that. Many times we even asked them, all right, if this is a bad idea, if what we're doing is the wrong way to do it, if there's a better way to do it, Lord, please tell us, let us know what it is. And we got, as I mentioned before, every time that we talked with people, we did learn something new. So I think that helps validate the process, because we took those insights and we took those best practices and we rolled that into what we believe is we rolled into the plan that we have presented here for all of you. So I guess it's probably longer than I needed to answer, but the short answer is yes, I think God's here has been very active along the way.
I'm going to go ahead and put Sandy on. Sandy, would you weigh in on that too, please?
Yeah, even though the governing board was 100% behind this plan, believe me, through the whole process, they ask a lot of questions, and the plan changed over time, particularly the timeline and so on, based on the wisdom. And as Mark said right at the beginning, we believe at Trinity that God speaks through his people, and your elected governing board are some of his people. So, and he also spoke through all the churches we interviewed. So I definitely felt God's hand through the whole process.
Great, thanks, Sandy. I'm going to go ahead and get Ken back up spotlighted. Ken, some other questions to move forward with. First of all, one, I can probably just answer this one quickly. It says, with all the changes in staffing, can a full org chart of Trinity staff be provided? I'd be glad to provide that for you. I'll find a way to communicate that through the e-news at each of our sites and things like that. So we would be glad to go ahead and provide that for you. Has God given the board any direction whether to increase or decrease our number of sites, Ken?
I would say yes. And if you go back and take a look at what our 5-year strategic plan was, I would say it even goes back to that time. Remember, one of the things that we initially, that was out of that and then going into immeasurably more was, gee, should we wind up adding on another site? But the feedback that wound up coming through loud and clear through all of you as members of the congregation was, you know what, right now, that's not the priority. And so, yes, we have looked at that. I think you've heard Mark and the other pastors talking about, our on-site services that we're going to continue to have. That might be, that essentially may be our next 5th site that we have, that we continue to go, because we know we can reach people in a lot of different directions. So we're always looking to try and listen to what God's plan is for us. Right now, we believe that is the online church process. But as far as for another site right now, we don't know of one where God's at, but we're always trying to hear and listen to what, God's got to say to us. So if anybody knows a church that, is something there, and it's all lined up and it's just waiting for you to let us know, give one of us a call, because we want to make sure and listen.
Okay, another one, Ken, is if it's not an invasion of privacy, can you share why Pastor Dave wasn't chosen? Did he decline?
So I would not say it was a matter of privacy. We did go through, because Pastor Dave is, since he did go through the resident or seminary program at seminary, he was one of the people that would be eligible to take on this position and role. We did go through and we did talk with, and as part of the interviewing process, we did talk with obviously both Pastor Nick and Pastor Dave. We did talk with both of their wives as well as we were going through this process. But where we were at this point in time, we believe that with Nick, he is with his leadership and all of the things that he has done, we believe that we're lead to call Nick as our next senior pastor. But if there's anybody else wants to add some other things along the way for that, please do.
Well, Ken, maybe I just add a word that I never heard anyone on the board say that they didn't feel that Pastor Dave could be our next senior pastor,
right,
and would be a wonderful senior pastor and have the gifts for it. It just felt through the process that God was leading you in the direction he led you. And I heard that pretty loudly and clearly.
Yeah, and to, I guess, maybe build a little bit on that, Pastor Dave's a very gifted guy, and he will be a senior pastor someday. You know, we love having Dave here as part of Trinity. We want Dave to stay here as part of Trinity. But we also know Dave's got to follow where God is leading him to, you know, as well in what to do. And he's been doing a great job at Trinity Galewood, and all the people that are involved and just even getting everything going in the neighborhood with that church. I mean, he's a gifted guy. So, and someday he's going to be a senior pastor.
Okay, another one says, Pastor Nick seems to have a more traditional style of leading worship and in choice of music at his site that is not followed by other sites which have a more casual style. Is there concern that Pastor Nick would try to remake the other sites as more traditional liturgical in worship? And maybe I could take a quick shot at that. And then Ken, if you want to jump in as well, because I think it speaks to our philosophy. So our philosophy at Trinity is and has been that it's up to the individual site pastor at their site to decide on the style that is best going to serve the people at that site and the community that site is trying to reach. If you speak with Pastor Nick, I think he would tell you that the style at Trinity Kimberly Way isn't necessarily his personal preferred style, but more the one that he believes he's been hearing from young families with kids in the neighborhood and in the community immediately around Kimberly Way, a style that is best suited for them. Knowing that our Green Trails campus is also very near, if people are looking for a more contemporary style, certainly builds into that decision as well. But for example, when we started Trinity Galewood, it was totally up to Pastor Dave and his team there as to what that style would look like. Very traditional looking building. They could have very easily said, well, we're going to do more of a traditional style of worship there, but they believed that in that location, the best possible way of worshiping was with the style that they have. And me as senior pastor, my personal style has done, I think if you talk to all four of those guys, they would tell you my personal preference for style, which by the way, I would defy any of you to figure out what it is, because I'm not sure I figured out what it is. But if you ask them, they will tell you that I've had nothing to say as senior pastor about their style. And one of the advantages to calling a candidate from within the congregation, someone like Nick, is Nick has been raised in that culture. He understands that culture. He believes in that culture. And so while I don't know that we ever specifically asked Nick that question, I know I personally have, and I don't know if the call committee did during their discussion, but I'm very confident that Nick would say that it's really still going to be up to the individual site pastors for that. So I don't know, Ken, you want to add any more to that?
Yeah, what he said.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no plans for changing anything around as far as style of worship. And it is up to the individual site pastors. And I believe that philosophy is going to be continuing going forward.
Ken, another question. It says, while I understand the desire to keep this position internal, in reviewing his resume, I can't help but feel Nick's experience running an organization the size of Trinity, a $3 million budget, or a $3 budget, it says, but I think we know what it was meant there, it is light from a business perspective. So his experience in running an organization the size of Trinity is light from a business perspective. Has this been considered?
And the short answer for that is yes. I guess I'll try and answer this in more succinct fashion. nobody going through seminary, they don't have enough business classes for anybody that's going through, especially for a congregation that's our size. It's not part of their synodical training as you go through. But that's also part of why we have laid out our structure and our plan for this transition plan in the way we have, because we know that, especially with the number of sites that we have, Mark, when he started out here, we had one site. So as we started to expand and as God was giving us those opportunities, he kind of grew with that along the way. And Mark also at one point in time had Sandy Jett as his executive director, because he had somebody that was involved that had some of the business experience and acumen and all the gifts that Sandy wanted to bring in. So there was some coaching and learning and mentoring that wound up happening with Mark when Mark was early in that role. And that's part of what the plan here, we purposely set it up for this overlap time where Mark was around to be able to help Nick through that process along the way and let him know, okay, where do you have to worry about? Where do you have to look at some things? And the other good thing is we've got Sally there that can also provide some of that input and guidance and, just all the things that you need to think about, because there is definitely a lot for a church our size and with the budget that we've got.
Cool. Thanks, Ken. And by the way, other members of the board, if any of you want to jump in on any of these questions, please don't hesitate to either, put a thing in the chat there so I can see it, or, wave your hand at me on the screen or something like that.
Yeah, because no one's jumping, I was supposed to get the softball questions and all the other smart people, they were supposed to get these tough ones for me. So
here's, go ahead, please.
I did have just one quick comment as I was listening to Ken's responses.
Jump in.
Plus, I feel a little like I better bail him out here a little bit. I think going back to the question about changes, again, Ken made the point at the outset, we felt that changes were much more likely. And in fact, we heard very loudly from one particular outside candidate that we did talk with that the comment was made, I'm not interested in running somebody else's megachurch. And what we heard in that was, listen, I'd love to come in and take over an organization and be able to lead a flock in ministry of that nature, but that I'm going to do it in kind of my way. And one of the things we felt is that with a strong internal candidate, again, we felt we could promote and build on our existing model without having to go through significant disruption to it, because we just quite honestly felt that it was on the right direction and that we really didn't feel a need for change. So that was another aspect of kind of really keeping our focus internal rather than expanding the external search.
Thanks, Doug. I'm going to go ahead and pin me for just a second, because there are two questions here that I think I can answer. This one is, how many years was Pastor Mark a site pastor before he became a senior pastor? Well, first of all, when I came to Trinity, as it was mentioned before, we were only one site. And I had come from a mission congregation out in the Elgin area where I had been about 5 years. So that would be kind of similar to one of our sites in size and scope and things like that. So honestly, when you take a look at Nick's resume and my resume at that point, I was older because I had more experience in the teaching ministry before I went to seminary. But Nick had a number of years of experience with leading campus ministry through InterVarsity, which was a little different experience than my teaching experience, obviously, but honestly, fairly similar in the amount of ministry experience to what I had when I first came at Trinity. Another question was, when will the folks at Galewood and South Naperville be represented on the governing board? So our philosophy as a congregation is that every single member of our board represents every single one of our members of the congregation and every single one of our sites. Now, they may have their preferred site that they attend. Like, for example, right now, Paige Craig, who is on our board, Galewood is her site. That's where she attends. But if you'd ask Paige, are you the Galewood representative to the board? I'm sure she would say, no, I represent all the campuses. Now, I'm certainly much more familiar with Galewood. Certainly that colors how she affects the things we talk about, because that's her site. But she recognizes, and all of our board members do, that their responsibility is to represent all of our sites. When candidates are nominated and when a ballot is put before you, we do try to put candidates from a variety of sites out there. But again, the goal isn't to try to get each site with a representative on the board. Rather, it's that all members represent all of our sites. And let me keep moving on here. So what is the plan for Nick to be fully immersed in all sites? He's relatively unknown at the locations outside of TKW. I think maybe I'll start on that, and then if somebody else wants to jump in too, because I'll be the one working with Nick. If the congregation calls him, remember he starts as senior pastor-elect January 1st, and for a full year, I will still be senior pastor. By the way, I've been reminding people on staff pretty consistently, doesn't matter what happens Sunday, I'm still your boss for the next year and a half, okay? Let's not forget that, you know? So I'll have a chance to be working side by side with Nick. One of the things that I've been doing is going and preaching at all the sites, and I intend to at least go and be present at all of our sites and probably do some preaching, rotating among sites once we're back indoors. And so I anticipate that Nick would join me in that right away, that for those first 6 months, a lot of times when you see me, Nick is going to be with me. But I would also say that don't forget, Nick is part of our team leaders right now, which means all 4 of our site pastors are part of that team. And we spend a lot of time talking about what's going on at our sites, sharing and talking about what's going on in ministry. So even though people may not be as familiar with Nick, I would say he has a strong familiarity with what's going on at the other 3 sites already, and we would use that next year just to continue to build that as well. So I don't know, Ken, do you want to say anything more on that?
No, I think that covered, Mark. I mean, that was intentional as part of this transition plan, is one of the things that's rolled into as far as the benefits of this time when there is that overlap. And it is also was with the intent purpose of that Nick could go around to all of the other sites and spend some time with people, and people get to know him during that period.
Another question here is, who will be on the call committee for the site pastor at TKW? And then there was another question that's related. Will the TKW site pastor be called in light of the site that likes traditional worship? Interestingly enough, the other question was saying, well, I think maybe it'd be better if we had somebody that was more blended than traditional for that site. So 2 different perspectives there. But again, I'll just say a little bit about that. And then pass it on. In our structure right now, it's really up to the senior pastor to recommend someone for a site leadership. We did that, for example, with Pastor Tony at Green Trails. And when Pastor Dan retired, it was really up to me as senior pastor to bring Tony to the board and the congregation and let them know that he was going to take over there. Now, when we call Tony was already called, so we didn't need a new call. When we call a pastor, the congregation does have to approve that person. But like, for example, when we first called Mike to be the pastor at Green Trails, once he had reached, South Naperville, once we had reached that point where he was ready for a call, I as senior pastor, brought his name to the board and then to the congregation for that approval process. And I can tell you that we will do the same thing that the board has done through this process, and that is we will seek God's will in this, and we will be looking for who we believe God is providing as the best next person for Kimberly Way. That would start with looking at internal candidates. You know, are there already people involved here in the process that are part of our ministry that God may be leading to step into a pastoral role and go through something like that specific ministry pastor program that Tony and Mike went through. So we'll be looking at all those kinds of things. The good news is we have a lot of time for that, because that person wouldn't begin until January of 2022. So we have some time there. Ken, I don't know, anything else you want to add there?
I don't think so, Mark. No, I think that covered it.
All right, so let me keep moving on. So the question is asked, how can a board member who only attends one site make decisions for all the sites? So I would love to hear your answer there, Ken, or is there somebody else on the board that would like to weigh in on that? Because you guys are the ones that are doing that, maybe attending one site, but making decisions for all. So maybe Ken, I'll start with you and I'll watch and see if somebody else wants to, or if one of the other board members wants to jump in, just unmute yourself and let me know so I can get you.
So we as the board, we do represent all sites. I mean, any decision that we bring or that we talk about along the way, it's not because I attend here or I go there. We are looking at we're looking at Trinity overall as a congregation. We look at Trinity as a congregation overall. I mean, Joanne and I, we bounce, a lot between Green Trails and Kimberly Way. But, we got invited by Pastor Mike, and a number of us on the board went down to South Naperville a couple of weeks ago. Now, with that said, we represent all the sites. And I'm going to put, I guess, the rest of our board members on the spot a little bit in that it's good for us to go and visit all the sites. And I think everybody has gone to all of the different sites at some period of time, or at least the vast majority. But that's more with the idea so that all of you know who we are, and so that we can get to know who all of you are. And so we can identify with each other just because we are one congregation. But any decision, it's never been anything that, well, I don't want to do that because I like contemporary worship, or I don't want to do that because I like traditional. That doesn't factor into it. I've never seen that for all my time here.
Mark, yeah, I think something that to be thinking about is that, frankly, the board doesn't make all those nitty-gritty decisions for each site like you're thinking. The board is pretty much, we're a policy-based board, and the site pastors are working with Mark all the time. So believe me, the site pastor is the boss of the site, and we only get involved. It'd be a very high-level decision.
Thanks, guys. Not hearing anybody else jump in. Was Pastor Nick the only person considered for the position, or the person recommended from the board? And there's another question, Ken, that is about, might have been answered, but how many outside candidates were interviewed?
Okay, let me see. It kind of combines a couple of things. So yes, when we went through this, let me take a step back. When we started with this process, there were no preconceived ideas as far as for who that person was going to be. If it was internal, if it was external, we went into this with understanding that we knew we needed to find a good qualified person to be able to be in that role that had all of the skills and abilities that were needed. But there was no preconceived point of, all right, Nick's the guy. That was never the case. And we did talk with, we even had the discussions, what Mark talked about before, as far as for, well, why couldn't all four of our past leaders besides Mark be considered for that role, and understanding what the synod and the guidelines and things which are set up through them. As far as for the external candidates, I think Doug talked about that. The one person that we did talk to did tell us that, well, let me take another step back. One of the things that we heard, and this is being very transparent, and this is not meant to be something that's controversial, and no one on the board can kick me under the table right now because we're all in different rooms. There's very few people or pastors that have, one, all the skills that you need in order to have and participate and be a senior pastor in a church like ours, and two, there's not many of them that want it. Many of them want their single parish or type of congregation. So you automatically narrow down the number of candidates externally that would even want to be in this role, would be ones that we would consider for that role. And the one that we did wind up talking to, as Doug mentioned before, came in it with the perspective of, you know, I would want to set my own direction here. I wouldn't want to build on, you know, the successes that others have had in this congregation.
Yeah, Ken, I'd also just remind people that one of our strongest values as a congregation is that we believe God has given us here, in most cases, everything we need to do the ministry he's called us to do. And in rare cases, that's been an exception where we believe God had shut some doors and directed us outside. By the way, one of those cases was when we called Pastor Dave to do the work at our Galewood campus. We didn't believe we had somebody ready to step into that role in a more urban environment. And so as we looked at internal candidates, we didn't find one that we believed God was leading us to. And that's when we started looking externally, and we were blessed to discover Pastor Dave and Gretchen and their family just graduating from the seminary. And I still remember spending some time with them and walking out and going, oh my gosh, they're the ones. God is leading them to be part of our ministry. And so, but we always look internally first. And so again, part of the counsel that the board heard from other congregations that have been through these transitions is if you have strong internal candidates, there's a high degree of preference towards moving towards those candidates because they understand the culture. Again, unless you believe a major leadership change is needed in the congregation, a major direction change is needed, and then that would be different. Another question is, how can we pray for the transition subcommittee and the process? Ken, you want to say how people could be praying for this as it moves forward?
Yes, so we've got, there's a lot of work that's been done, and we do thank all of you for the prayers and things that we've gotten along the way and support, because that has meant a lot. But as we go forward here, there's still a lot of work to be done. So I think your prayers could be that God continues to provide the guidance so that we hear and listen to what his will actually is, and that we as the board can help support Nick and this entire process as we go forward. But then as all of you as members of the congregation, that you are also actively supporting the work and the things that we're doing, because that's really important. I mean, all of us, we're all members of this church, but it's everyone that needs the support in order to help continue to make this happen. And if anybody else has anything to add, please put that out there, because wisdom is sure something that we still need. We can't get enough of God's wisdom in this thing, so the more, the better.
Another question here is, and I think I can handle this one, Ken, real quickly, asking who Sandy is. Someone's confused. Sandy is on the governing board. In case you guys didn't understand that, Sandy is one of our elected members of the governing board. Now, Sandy's a little unique, and this might have been confusion because Sandy mentioned someone mentioned Sandy having been on staff as executive director. When I first came to Trinity, fairly quickly, I realized that I was in a little over my head when it came to some of the organizational things I needed to understand, like budget process, like doing performance appraisals with staff. And so Sandy, at the time, was working for Service Master of America and was thinking about retiring. And so I went to Sandy and asked if he would come on staff as executive director to help me with that process. Sandy served for 5 years in that role, and then did indeed retire. And in the time intervening from that, was elected to our governing board and is serving your second term on the board, Sandy, or is it your first? Second term on the board right now. So that's who Sandy is. Another question was, can you cite specific examples of how Pastor Nick grew the church versus Pastor Dave? I feel that answer wasn't supported. Well, first of all, I'd say it isn't a competition between those two or anything like that. We want God to be blessing all of our sites, and we've seen growth at our sites. In regards to Nick, one of the blessings that we've seen under Nick's leadership at our Kimberly Way location is, first of all, we have seen our average worship attendance go up. We had been on a very slow decline in average worship attendance at our Kimberly Way location. And under Nick's leadership, that has turned around. And actually, this is obviously before COVID hit this spring. We had seen attendance growing there, but specifically the thing that I think was most exciting to me is we've seen growth regarding young families with children. Our kids ministry there at Kimberly Way had gotten fairly small. And again, pre-COVID, we saw a large jump in what was going on in our kids ministry there. If you've been attending Kimberly Way, the other thing that you've noticed is we used to have a big young kids choir that used to sing, and that had dwindled down to, we had maybe a handful of kids in that choir. Well, the last time they sang, again, right before COVID, the church was just full up in front of kids up there singing in that choir. So God has indeed blessed Nick's leadership at Kimberly Way. Another question here, why is the congregation voting on one person rather than 3 options after the board has filled out the candidates? I can tell you that that has never been the case at Trinity. Some church constitutions prescribe what you just described as 3 persons brought to the congregation. Other church constitutions in our synod prescribe the board bring, or the call committee bring, 1 person to the congregation. That's Trinity's practice. And that has been Trinity's practice since it began in 1960. So there's nothing new there. When I was called as senior pastor, the then call committee brought 1 name to the congregation, and it was mine, and the congregation either said yes or no. There were 4 other people that had been called to be senior pastor before me who all turned down the call, but it was the same thing in each of those cases. 1 name was brought to the congregation, and the congregation either said yes or no. I'm assuming that the person asked this question either grew up in or came from a congregation that had a different form of governance, but again, both of these forms of governance are common in the Missouri Synod, and Trinity's has always fallen into the second case where we do what we're doing today, and that's bring 1 name and you say yes or no. And if you say no, the board goes back to the drawing board and starts the process over. Another question says, so only 1 outside candidate was interviewed and 2 internal candidates, so a total of 3 interviews for this pivotal role in our congregation and sites. Was the district office involved in the candidate's identification process? I know the district office was briefly mentioned, but not at the depth of the involvement available for candidate identification. I can answer the district part of that, and then Ken, if you want to comment, or anybody else on the board wants to comment on the number of candidates. With larger congregations in our synod, the district often takes a very different role than they do with smaller congregations. A process with smaller congregations is a collection of names. Those names are sent to the district vets those names, adds other names, and sends them back. I don't know of any other large congregation where that happens. Typically at larger congregations, it's a different leadership transition process. It's a much more important, in some ways, or delicate, not important. It's important in every congregation. That's not what I meant. What I mean to say is it's more complicated. That's a better word. So the process followed here, very typical for large churches in our synod. Our district president was informed every step of the way. Honestly, when I first let our district president know that I was considering retirement and the timeline for that, he said to me, I'm guessing that your congregation is going to call Nick to replace you. Now that just came out of nowhere. I had no idea. And certainly our board didn't presume that going into this process, but I could tell you, knowing our congregation and knowing the structure of our congregation and knowing Nick and his leadership, that wasn't a surprise at all to our district president. And again, I just say he is very supportive of the process. But Ken, can you maybe weigh in on a number of candidates interviewed?
I will attempt to, yes. So remember what I said a few minutes ago, and that is, especially for the external candidates, and there are so few men that are out there that have both the abilities and aptitude or desire to be a part of a congregation like ours. We heard that from a number of different churches as we were going through this process, which kind of surprised me, honestly. I didn't expect to hear that. And the other piece of it is, as we were starting this process, we did take a look at, because we heard from other churches of, if you've got internal candidates that are qualified and the direction you're going isn't broke, It's not that you may not to make some minor changes along the way, but it's not that you're seeing big problems that need to be addressed. Then it's important that you have someone that is, if you have someone that's internally qualified, that understands the culture, understands your church, understands how it works, that you will have a the transition and the direction and future activities will typically go smoother and better with having somebody internally. So that's why we did, as we started to hear that, and let me also, we as the subcommittee and as the entire board, there were a lot of challenges and good challenges of, are you sure? Why aren't you doing this? And it wasn't, we got much more direct with each other when we were talking in person. And that was good, but those challenges did take place. So we did think about these things. And as I said, when we started to hear from the external candidates, candidate, I want to change direction. All right, well, that's not where we think we need to go. Do we have people internally that are qualified? Yes. Then we go through the process of, when we're going through and doing these interviews and talking with people to see where we think that God was leading us. And that's why we narrowed it down to Nick.
Thanks, Ken. There's another question here. Would this be, or after this transition has begun, a good time to send the congregation a survey regarding preferences? Should we continue handshaking and greeting each other, things like that? And then, sorry, after COVID, it said, so I assume that meant survey after COVID's done. Keep in mind, one of the things that will happen over this next year is in July of next year, we begin a new 5-year strategic planning process. If you guys call Nick will lead that process, but I will still be senior pastor during the first 6 months of that process. And so I'll be helping Nick guide that. And every time we do a strategic plan, we do some sort of congregational survey. So I'm sure that will happen as a part of that new strategic planning process. Now, I don't know if we'll specifically ask the question about handshaking and greeting each other in the service. That tends to be a decision that's made not congregation-wide, but done by a site pastor, knowing his site and knowing what's going on in his site. But you can bet that we are going to be looking for a lot of input, and there's going to be cottage meetings, just like we did with our last strategic plan and with our Immeasurably More campaign. There's going to be lots of chances for the congregation to weigh in. There's one more question here, and it's this. So we saw a moderate increase at TKW under Pastor Nick's leadership. Didn't Pastor Dave grow Galewood from 0 to 2 to 300? I don't want to belittle that question, but again, I would just say this. First of all, the numbers aren't accurate there. I wouldn't describe what's happened through Nick's leadership as moderate at Kimberly Way, and the numbers aren't 2 to 300 at Galewood, although God has blessed that and there's been growth there. But I would just echo again, this isn't a competition in any way. Echo again that everything I heard from the board and everything I know of working every day with Dave and Nick, as they are both gifted men of God, both of whom God is using right now powerfully to lead his people. And by the way, will continue to use in many ways in the future. God has led the board to bring Nick's name to you. I believe that's from God. I really do. I would be thrilled if you call Nick to be our next senior pastor. I would love to work with him over this next year as senior pastor-elect, and would gladly work under his leadership a year from now, or a year from this January, as he would take over as senior pastor, and truly believe he is the one led by God. And that does not in any way undermine Dave's gifted leadership and the respect I have for Dave, and the incredible blessing I believe Dave is to our congregation, to the people at Trinity Galewood, and who knows what God has planned in the future. Remember, if this is God's decision, if God is speaking through his people, then God has a plan for Dave and his leadership as well. And Dave knows that as well. While the board feels there's no congregational changes in direction, is the board confident that this is the pulse of the congregation as a whole? Well, that's an interesting question. I don't know, Ken, how would you answer that?
I would answer that, well, primarily because we are looking at and we are listening to the people that we talk to. You know, we each have friends, we each have people that we know at each of the different sites, and that we take that input along the way. And we haven't seen anything that would indicate that we are, it's not that there aren't things that we can't work on and things that we can't do better at. But when you look at what's happening for many other churches, for many different reasons across not only our denomination, but in a lot of other ones, the amount of attendance that is going down, and attendance is not the only indicator. But we're seeing that we've got 4 sites that are healthy and are growing, and if looking at things in an objective type of fashion, I believe that we have a healthy congregation, that God's blessing the direction that we're going, and we keep and continue to look for that guidance. So to me, as far as for, you know, an objective performance type of area, we have not heard of any input or seen anything that I think would lead us to believe that we have to change course or direction in a drastic way.
Well, and Mark, I mean, as you said 2 or 3 times, we're going to have this strategic planning process. That's part of what you do there, is you listen. So there'll be plenty of opportunities for people to give suggestions and speak to the future.
Okay, so Ken, in the questions there and also in the chat, there's been a couple of members that have called for the vote. That is perfectly, this is a congregation meeting, and so they certainly have the right to do that, to call for that vote. We don't have a poll ready to see whether people are ready to vote, but what we can do is, I'm trying to think, see if there's a way for me to, that's a good question. So basically, it's been moved and it's been seconded by someone from the congregation that we call for the vote. The congregation is within its rights to do that. How about this? I believe you can raise your hand in the participant window. So Ken, I would suggest that we ask people who are ready for the vote to go ahead and raise their hand in the chat. I see people are already starting to do that, and we'll be able to see fairly quickly if there's a majority of people that have raised their hand that they're ready to vote. So are you good with that, Ken? You're the chairman.
Yes, no, please, if we're trying to, that's one of the, you know, hard spots of not being able to gather in some fashion to see everybody's hands going up or not and look at all of your faces to gauge our responses along the way. So yes, we've got a way to do this. Please go ahead and, you know, raise your hand or let us know in some way that as far as for what to actually take towards a vote.
So we have 188 participants online right now, and it means, again, we probably have more than that, but we have 188 devices connected, and of those, Ken, right now 123 of them have raised their hand saying yes, they want to call the vote. So that is a majority.
Yep. Okay. All right. So then, Mark, do you have, or I have?
I've got it.
Okay.
The poll to put up?
Yes, please. All right. So we are at this point now, we are going to take a vote, and here's the resolution that is being put before all of you. And it's that I vote to approve the senior pastor transition plan as presented by the governing board, and to call Nick Price as senior pastor-elect beginning January 1, 2021, and senior pastor beginning January 1, 2022. Please go ahead and cast your vote. While you're doing that, I did see a question come up that said, how can we, if we have multiple people in one household trying to vote? At this point, I'm not sure, because you would have to have registered individually and do it on different devices. I'm not sure if that's still, if you can do that quick enough or not.
Yeah, Ken, it is only one vote per device. And so they have to be able to cast that vote in the poll. Ken, I don't see further votes coming in. I've received the votes from Green Trails. There were 2 people who voted. Wait, let me just make sure I have that right. 2 yeses from Green Trails. And we also have yeses from our panelists as well. So together that brings the total to 157 yes and 21 no.
Okay. That being the vote of 157 votes yes, 21 votes no, the majority carries, and that provides the approval for adopting the transition plan as it has been presented, and that we will also be extending the call for Nick Price to be our next senior pastor, as was identified in the motion. So thank you everybody for voting. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your questions. Hopefully we're able to answer them in a way that was satisfactory to you along the way. But if you do have any other follow-up questions along the way or comments, please reach out to myself, any of the members of the board, to Mark, so that we can get your, hear your thoughts and get what, understand where all of you are at.
So Ken, there's a question from one of the other panelists actually, and that is, we know that there are some congregations that once there's been a vote, once a candidate has been chosen, someone makes a motion to say, we'd like to make that unanimous and ask everybody to vote unanimously. I don't know that I think that's kind of a formality that some congregations do that I don't know how helpful or useful it is, but that would be your prerogative as chair if you wanted to entertain that kind of motion.
And I guess we could. I never thought of it. I don't know. It's never been anything that I've done. So how would we do that, Mark?
All right. So when I used to be one of the district vice presidents or circuit counselors, there are some congregations that want to express to the new senior pastor, hey, we're all on, you might not have been my first choice, but we're all on board. Right. And so that has been one of the things that often congregations do. Honestly, I don't know that it would impact Nick in any way. I don't know if we need to take the time to do that, but it wasn't an official motion from the floor or anything like that. It was just something suggested by one of our other panelists. So
well, how about I present it this way? I mean, we've gotten a vote. I'm not sure we've got a way in this environment in order to be able to do that. We have heard from, I think, our entire congregation here along the way for the vote. To me, this does show still an overwhelming majority as far as for support. But what I'd also ask is, we've got a very great group of people on our staff team. We've got gifted pastors, and the things that they wind up doing and the work that they wind up doing in all these areas, we are blessed to have all of them there. So my ask is that all of you continue to pray for all of our pastors, for all the things that they're doing, and for Trinity as a church overall, and that is something that we could all agree to do unanimously across the board. So that would be my ask.
Okay, Ken. There's been a question, are the bylaws of Trinity available for all members to see? Absolutely. If you call the church office, we'd be glad to send you the electronic copy of the bylaws. There's another question here about, I've heard some discourses about competition between sites. With that in mind, how can we be united as one church in multiple locations? I don't know that I've heard discourses about competition between sites. I'm not sure where that comes from. I can tell you that the primary thing that unites us as a family of believers is our mission, that we believe God wants us to be more like Jesus. And he wants more and more people to be more like Jesus. And that mission of helping people look, live, and love more like Jesus is the thing that unites us as sites. Not our style of worship, not who the leader is, not our location. It's that calling that we all feel, that burden we all feel to help people know who Jesus is, experience his loving grace powerfully in their life, and want to share that life with others so that all people can look, live, and love more like him. And I would say that's the thing that unites us. Ken, I don't see any other open questions. So if you want to go ahead and move to close the meeting, we can do that.
Okay, not seeing any other questions come up. So then I do move that we do end our special meeting here. Thank you everybody for participating. I do have the panelists that I can see here as far as for that, but Mark, you're our parliamentarian. Do I need an official vote to close the meeting or not? Or
we could just do a show of hands again. That'll work just fine. You know, Ken, just one quick note before you do that. I want to make sure everybody sees in the chat, one of our members is Bill Amais, who was our Northern Illinois district president for many years, was on district staff for many years. I don't know how many call meetings Bill has sat in over the years at various congregations, but Bill writes, as an NID staff and DP for 39 years and having watched hundreds of congregations place calls, this is a great day for Trinity. And I would just echo that. And thank you, Bill, for being a part of our church family. And thank you for all your years of serving. And thank you for those words of affirmation. They mean a lot coming from you. So sorry, Ken, go ahead. If you want to ask people to raise their hands to adjourn the meeting, we can do that.
Yes. So all in favor of adjourning our current meeting, please raise your hand, post, wave, or whatever we do online.
And out of 155, we're up to 113, 114, 115, 116. So we have a majority there, Ken. So.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for your time. God's blessings on y'all of your days going forward here. And if you do have any other questions along the way, please reach out to any one of us. And thank you. And we'll make this the end of our meeting.
Thank you, everyone. God's blessings.